Are you okay? Listen to my voice. We must get out. Shit! Run, run, run! Go through that door, fast! No! Back, 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 back! Are you okay? Move! You must go!
Mists of Aiden, previously known as House on the Hill, is a first-person psychological horror game based around repeating and changing events.
Have you noticed that there's not a single knife in this kitchen? Well, shit! Okay, it's okay. He probably just likes to make sausages or something like that. The owner is a hunter, so it's okay.
Atmosphere. Mists of Aiden is a bit of a mixed bag by design, with each part of the game tuning itself into a specific type of horror, with the first loop being like a typical slasher, and the next one being more like a supernatural haunting. In this regard, it's hard to say the overall atmosphere as it changes frequently. It does a decent job of building it up at each loop with a slow trudge through a dark, spooky mansion, but as the game goes on it becomes less and less impactful, until the last two loops where it's hard to be afraid of the same setup you've seen 3 or 4 times. But what kills the tone for me ultimately is the operative, who gives you instructions through an earpiece. They chat constantly to the player in an oddly happy disposition, and their voice just doesn't sound right when they're trying to be menacing or creepy, and sometimes they ruin a lot of scripted events by simply having their lines delivered at the wrong time, revealing something is going to happen a second or so before it does, and this breaks the immersion quite badly.
Calm down. It's just me, your friendly inner voice. What's up? Why is everything dark?
The moments without the operative where you're allowed to just take things in are, in my opinion, much better. There's a genuine air of eeriness and mystery to exploring the house, but it's never too long before the operative breaks the silence and the atmosphere along with it. My personal favourite loop is the second one that had some genuine tension as you pulled the cloth off of things to see what lied below, and the third loop had some really wonderful environments with some ominous caves that somehow resembled H.R. Geiger with a Lovecraftian theme. Besides the operative, the real problem is that Mists of Aiden's premise clashes badly with its execution. When the atmosphere does start getting good, it's either interrupted or the loop is over. There's a lot of odd design choices as well that just break immersion or ruin important moments that I'll get to later. No Harry Masons.
He is thirsty.
Scares. Whilst the game tries a lot of different themes, the scares are very limited. They reuse the same ones quite a lot, which is disappointing considering that the main selling point of the game is variety. Having something appear in front of the player is done a shocking number of times, and it's not that effective either. The chase sequences initially seem exciting and almost frightening when you start sprinting, but it feels abnormally slow, and whilst this made me panic the first time that my pursuer would catch me, it seems the enemies are also very slow, and once I clicked onto this drained all of the fear out of the chase sequences and made them almost comical, since they would never catch me as long as I kept moving slowly forwards. The overall enemy design isn't that great either. A lot of detail has been put into them, but they're either generic ghosts, alien-like monsters, or this weird, doll-like mutation that's certainly unique, but somehow not menacing. There's a ton of scripted events, and while some of them are pretty good, like the mannequins in the second loop, some are either very obvious and things you can see coming a mile off, ruined by the operative, or sometimes just go nowhere. In the second loop, there's a chest that bounces around like something's trapped inside it, but nothing really comes of it. It just bounces around in endless animation until you move the scene on. Or in the first loop, there's a creepy door that opens up on its own, but it reveals nothing inside. A trend throughout the game is that there seems to be so many things that could happen with all of the possibilities and mechanics like the camera that is set up but then just don't go anywhere or don't lead to anything interesting, which is exceedingly disappointing. That's still no Harry Masons. Sound design. For a lot of the gameplay, the ambient music is so subtle it's barely noticeable, registering just like a low rumbling wind with some reverb. But when the talking stops, there's an eerie quiet and its low tones start to work their magic. It does a great job in the second and third loops, building this feeling of dread and anticipation when the game is quiet enough for you to be able to hear it. However, there's no other music in the game whatsoever besides some piano at the end. Even in big chase sequences, there's just nothing to emphasize the moment, and it feels very lacking as a result. Again, the operative kills many moments throughout the game by either making jokes, failing to be frightening, or just having his lines appear before something happens, so much so that I felt the game would be better off without him. The sound effects weren't really that memorable, but seemed functional nonetheless. It's sad to say the only memorable thing about the sound design is the operative, and he's my least favourite feature. That's still no Harry Masons. Gore. There's several rooms filled with hanging animal carcasses and some blood and bodies hanging from the ceilings in certain places. These were really detailed and realistic, which made them really unpleasant to look at. One of the enemies has their lower jaw missing and their tongue flails around, which is kind of entertaining. Outside of the first loop, there isn't much gore whatsoever, and it doesn't really feel overdone or excessive. That's one Harry Mason. Story. This part will contain spoilers. The story begins in a garage as you prepare for a robbery of a large mansion, and the operative who speaks to you through your earpiece guides you through the process of breaking in, commenting on most of your actions. Suddenly, the break-in goes horribly wrong, and after escaping with the item, the game stops and winds back like a VCR tape, and you're back outside the mansion at the beginning. The story repeats itself until the end. You're trying to break in, find an item or jewel, you discover something you shouldn't, there's a minor mystery, and after a dramatic scene, it resets. Whilst no two loops are alike, they all start the same. It's hard to really pin a connection to anything or see an overarching story until the final loop in the epilogue. The final loop sees the operative seemingly talking to the player character directly, but it's a bit ineffectual as the player character doesn't really have a character. He goes off talking about a family you've never seen, and it just feels awkward. Somehow it does seem like it's leading up to something big, but then it just stops and rewinds like all the other loops and ends up feeling a bit meaningless. The epilogue tries to explain that everything that happened was the failed works of a writer, with each loop being another attempt the writer had at making a successful horror story, and after this the game just sort of ends. It's incredibly anticlimactic and feels pretty abrupt. The story is a mess and feels sort of tacked on to give the events of the game some kind of meaning, making the final score 1 out of 5 Harry Masons. Mists of Aiden had a lot of opportunities to really make itself something interesting and unique, but it feels half-hearted and anticlimactic. The second and third loops showed the game had a lot of promise, but so much of it is just totally wasted in my opinion. A lot of decisions clash really badly or just don't work, things don't go anywhere after being set up, and some mechanics are underutilized completely. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion on horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I roll my eyes at the ghost walking in front of me, I did not scream like a banshee or run away with the computer, and I advise you don't either. There will be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. You can always go check out Bumps in the Middle of the Night. Peace. My voice is really done today.